So my question was, I watched a video. This was 2003, the Arnie J. Richter, right?
Yes.
Where it was a 6-year planning process to build that boat. Is that still the same? Was the Madonna an equally lengthy process?
It went a little bit quicker with Madonna. Part of that planning process is convincing ourselves what it is we need. Is there enough volume to justify making this jump?
Cost.
Are we going to have the revenue? Will that be consistent to help pay for it? And what will the final invoice be? You know, what is that total? Is it something we can handle? And it takes a bit of convincing. We're very reluctant to dive into something if we don't feel we can handle the payments. So we go at it in a very, I think, conservative fashion.
Sure. Because
there's so much dependency, not just us and jobs and income, but the entire island.
Yeah.
People who have property here who are depending on we can't fail is the way we look at it. Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and then it's a matter of, okay, if we were to go ahead, what would it look like? And that takes discussion. Much of that was done, as I've previously mentioned, by Hoyt, Rich Ellefson, and our crew. They all had their input. Less really by myself and members of the board of directors. We have 7 directors.
Yeah.
And when all is said and done, it's a bit of tooth pulling and sometimes disagreement, rather vehement disagreement sometimes on which direction to go.
Yeah.
We were embarked really on trying a remodel of one of the other ferries and looked at several options. Could we lengthen the Arnie J. Richter, for instance, make it a larger deck?
Yeah.
Stick in 25, 30 feet midsection. That's been done on vessels. Would that work?
And I don't want to interrupt you, but that would have then, oh no, the Arnie J is an icebreaker too.
Yes, that would have been taking our largest boat, making it even larger.
Right.
But there are always problems when you start cutting a vessel. Irabaki became probably the most serious look at remodeling and lengthening one of the existing ferries. And then when all is said and done, it was a vessel built in 1970.
Yeah.
The hull skin or the shell is 5/16 plate, not really heavy as we would like. We really prefer something like 3/8.
Okay.
It wouldn't have ice breaking capabilities. We would have to repower. Right. It has a cabin and an overhead that is only about 9 feet, so you can get typical vans and cars underneath, but it's not enough to pass trucks, campers, and so on. Mm-hmm. So now you consider raising the height of the superstructure. You've really, you wind up not rebuilding a new boat, but you're doing so much remodeling.
And so it's a cost analysis of in order to do this, it's going to cost X amount and still not get us everything we want.
Right.
So.
And then also entering into that process, besides, if you can afford it and you have this great idea, it's physically possible to do it. But then there are other constraints in the regulatory area by the U.S. Coast Guard. There's code of requirements that we have to satisfy. The vessel has to be safe. It has to have the proper stability. Many other features that you start to get into. Even, the vessel that maybe was built 20, 30, in the case of the Irabaki, 50 years ago. Yeah. So that has to be upgraded. If all you do is change the paint scheme and a few other little things, no problem. But when you start digging into
the actual
arrangements and structure of the vessel, now you've entered into an area where really the stability of the vessel and safety features, all of that has to be re-examined.
Right. And that actually, the boats, the fleet itself, is there a third party that the Coast Guard Safety Board, or is somebody who inspects these boats? Is that an annual thing that you have to go through, or?
Yes, the United States Coast Guard has an arm called the Marine Inspection or Marine Safety Department.
Okay.
And there's an office in Sturgeon Bay. Because of the amount of shipbuilding in the area, Sturgeon Bay has its own safety office. And they
Inspect
are,
them.
part of a larger network, which is all under the 9th District Coast Guard out of Cleveland, Ohio, and hierarchy,
Okay.
along the way. But they are people trained in, most of them have, I think, engineering backgrounds.
Sure.
Some of them mechanical, some chemical, et cetera. And they not only review the plans prior to construction and will make comments, red pencil, so things have, and so they're working
Redo it.
closely with
Yeah.
both the naval architect, the owner,
Yeah.
prospective owner, and the prospective builder.
Okay.
And by this time, we've selected the naval architect, who we're fortunate to have a very good naval architect in Sturgeon Bay with whom we've worked over the course of many years,
Right.
and a builder, Fincan-Terry,
Yes.
Bay Shipbuilding.
And the project manager with Fincan-Terry is a gentleman you've worked with for 4 different boats, if I'm right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so you have a long-standing, good relationship there.
That was a very strong part of the sales process for us, selling us on the idea. We looked at 4 different yards, and truthfully, a couple of them was just to get a comparative figure to see if,
Yeah.
is one significantly lower or higher than
Yeah.
the others. And Fincan-Terry Bay Shipbuilding was a bit higher than some, but they also were willing to come down, and they wanted the project. I mean, that's the sense that we got,
Yeah.
because they had a bit of a lull in their contract timeline where they
Yeah.
could fit this project in. And our project, being on the very small end of what they do, could be done almost entirely indoors. That's an advantage for them
Yeah.
in the winter months, and it's an advantage for us because we feel we would get a better product, and I think that certainly held true.
Yeah.
Their marks that they have for completion of the hull, and putting, actually in 2 sections, putting them together, rolling the hull over, finishing it, putting it back indoors to finish it. All of that, they were pretty close to hitting their marks.
Okay. And is it still, I watched the video where the hull is completed, they flip it upside down and stand beneath it, an inspector stands beneath it, and the outside is hit with a fire hose.
Yeah.
And then, is it still done that way?
Yes, yes. It
That's
seems
how it's done,
It
yeah.
seems a bit, let's see, crude or primitive, simple, but yeah, I mean, the idea is you don't want water leaking in through welds that are improperly completed.
Sure,
So
yeah, if you have a leak coming
want it to be tight,
through.
and they do
So-
find a certain, now some of the,
Tiny,
yeah, and that has to be then grooved out and re-welded.
Welded shut.
So they have someone in the yard almost on a daily basis checking, inspecting the welds, and that's in addition to the yard's own supervisory personnel who will also look over the shoulders, review the work that's been done for the day or the previous day. There are certain areas that will get pressure tested with air
Okay.
to make sure that they will hold, fuel tank being one, because it's significantly more important.
right.
So those have a pressure test.
So, a couple questions then. So, start to finish with Madonna, how much time from start to finish, from inception to completion? How much time elapsed?
Well,
About.
it was about 10, 11 months.
Okay.
It went a little bit longer than they had anticipated, mainly because in the final month there were a couple of little things.
So that was the actual building of it.
Yeah.
10, 11 months is what it takes to build the boat.
And a month or two in planning for them,
Okay.
pre-planning all of their personnel who are in the ordering supplies, the steel and so
Yeah.
on, has to be brought in from somewhere else. It has to meet certain requirements. It has, it needs to be U.S. manufactured steel.
Okay.
That's one of the requirements.
Yeah.
And pass certain testing processes.
So it's one of the requirements that it's U.S. manufactured steel. I didn't realize that.
It is for this type of vessel, yes.
Okay.
The engines had at least a 6-month, but I think it was a little longer than that, 6-month lead time on the engines and transmissions. Caterpillar engines, twin disc reduction gears.
Yeah.
Twin disc is based in Racine, Wisconsin, but they manufacture some of their components overseas, some in the U.S. So it takes a good lead time with a significant down payment to get that started. So
Yeah.
you've really made a commitment by that time.
Well, that's what I'm trying to, if I may ask, and maybe I shouldn't, but what is the total cost of a boat or of Madonna?
In rough terms, this one was double the Arnie J. Richter, which was 2003, 16, 17 years ago.
Yes.
That was about $3 million. So this is double.
This is double. So
And,
the Madonna is about a $6 million boat.
Yes.
And right when you're about to bring this boat out and put it into service, we have a pandemic. How did the timing of all of that work happen?
It was a significant
Was it a terrifying?
shock.
Yes.
Yes. Here we were more than 3/4 of the way to completing a new vessel.
Right.
Some of the major payments that are made on a certain completion rate for the project as a whole have to be made. We always like to enter a project having 1/3 to 1/2 in the bank, if
Yeah.
possible. Just gives us peace of mind if
Sounds like
something
sound
really
math.
goes sour. And it has proven to be a conservative approach has proven to be better. But when we got into May, we could see that this may really impact tourism, and levels of travel were so low
Initially.
in April and May. We, I think, had 3 or 4 trips perhaps in May.
And many sleepless nights, I would imagine.
Volume on a day there was, like maybe 30 years ago.
Yes.
It was not a good prospect looking ahead to summer, and yet, we had a contract. Bay Shipbuilding, even with the threat of COVID to their workers, they continued to work. They continued to come in. They instituted some precautions, so they continued to produce. And then, just fortunately for us, I think for Washington Island as a whole, in mid-June, it just kind of opened up.
Right.
As schools let out, people seem to have pent-up energy as well as finances enough to let's get out of here, let's go somewhere.
And people were not getting on planes, so maybe just the drive from wherever and then getting on a ferry was the adventure they needed.
I think that was part of it.
Yeah.
There's probably not one single answer to this, but
Sure.
Washington Island fared better even than many other island locations on the Great Lakes that we're aware of. I think all companies suffered, certainly up through a good part of June, and then saw a significant increase, but it was quite dramatic.
Yeah.
We hadn't expected that, and we were very...
So it went from a terrifying spring in the beginning of a pandemic to being, what, in terms of the best year ever in the ferry line, or top?
I think the previous year we had record numbers in terms of passengers and automobiles, and we were close to that. We didn't quite hit that, but we were very close to that.
Okay.
If April, May, early June had been more in line with what we had previous years, we probably would have had a record year. But when when the tourism was there, it came in, you know, with some great intensity.
Yeah.
And given the fact that there were many things not available for visitors,
Yeah.
restaurant numbers, I think, were down. Certainly the opportunity for dining was, Rock Island was closed.
Yeah.
Some of the museums, because of close quarters inside those, they were closed. And yet, despite that, people came, you know, in great numbers. So that was gratifying. And our christening process for the new ferry that was going to be, we'd hoped mid-June, latter part of June.
And
there was about a month delay in the finishing and acceptance of
Yeah.
the ferry as a product, and so we did the christening at Bay Shipbuilding.
And the christening had been planned, so we'll get into this, but the name Madonna, and is it Madonna or the Madonna or either?
The name is Madonna.
The name is Madonna.
If you're talking about the vessel, it is probably the Madonna.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll leave it to an author to school me on that. So the Madonna, the name, it's the first feminine name
Yes.
in the fleet ever. And can you tell us a little bit more about the choosing of that name?
Previous ferries had been named basically by Arnie Richter with the consent of Mary, his wife, and maybe some family members, but it was really his choice.
Yeah.
That's what ruled. And for this one, Hoyt kindly said to his mother, you know, why don't you come up with a name? So Mary Jo had that privilege, and we talked about a few different names.
What were some of the other names? I'm
Well,
just curious.
Chester Thorderson, or C.H. Thorderson, was one.
Okay.
Well, but, you know, he didn't really have anything to do with the ferry line. That's true. Actually, I don't remember the other names off the top of my head, but, you know, family names, things
Sure.
like that. There had been one named Voyager, kind of in honor of you know, French voyagers visiting the area. We thought, I think, of at least one Native American name that might have worked.
Yeah.
But we settled, or Mary Jo, I should say, initially settled on Madonna, so that became the name. And it's helpful in the process. Once you have the name of a vessel, you're kind of that's settled, and now you can go ahead with the project, and everybody knows what to call it, and you know it's on the blueprints and so
So the
on.
name is chosen really before
Well,
things-
early in the process.
very early in the
Yeah.
process.
I guess it doesn't have to be that way, but
No, but in this case it was. And the Madonna was significant for a couple of reasons I read. Obviously, Madonna being the mother of Jesus, but also, is it Ole Christensen?
Ole or Ule,
Ule,
I think in
okay.
origin, but Ole Christensen was the owner of the Madonna from 1894 through the time that he stopped sailing it, which was the latter part of 1914.
Okay.
And
he lived here
Yes.
on Washington Island.
at the end of Main Road.
Okay.
Where Netta Hanlon currently lives, or in that, right in that area. That He actually built the house adjacent to that, the last house on the right as you go south on Main Road.
Okay.
For one of his daughters.
Oh,
So he was a very talented immigrant,
yeah.
sailor, carpenter, had a marina, shipped wood products, did a lot of different things, very enterprising.
Okay. And so your wife chose the name based on both of those things, almost like the blessing of the mother of Jesus in addition to...
I think it probably weighed more toward the fact that it had historical reference
Yes.
to a schooner used on the island, and we thought it was a good name. I think she had an affinity for that, and the fact that it was a feminine name was a
Yeah.
different approach.
Right.
The old Madonna, the schooner, in its last days was basically driven up into the mud or sailed up into the mud, and there it sat to deteriorate.
And what year was that about?
1914.
1914.
End of 1914. And, you know, people, I think, used to skate around it and so on. The laws for many years had never reflected things being abandoned, vessels being abandoned as being part of the historical laws of the state of Wisconsin. Today, every state in the Great Lakes protects the lake bed and wreckage and so on that is found there. But there were many abandoned vessels, and Madonna was one. So, well, anyway, Arnie and Mary built their home on the shores of Detroit Harbor, looking out at what was left of the Madonna. And one, I think it was a Christmas or New Year's Eve, he and his brother put fuel oil to it and, you know, burned the vessel down to the ice line, I guess.
Oh, that's
so there's only
How
portions of it that remained afterwards. There's still boards and spikes and so on that can be
of the original Madonna that can be found with a snorkel or something.
But in that same property, which is where we now live, there was a shed, and in the shed was a steering wheel from this vessel, cast iron wheel, heavy, from the Madonna. It had a tag on it. It was intended to go to a woman who had been the counselor, manager of a girls' camp there on that property.
Okay.
And she never took it, never shipped it. So in 1990, I cleaned it up. It had the tag on it still, and it was used as a kind of a decorative thing at Northport in the restaurant there for several decades, and it now hangs on our fireplace in our home. So I think that close association with the Madonna, having been there, the steering wheel, the Ole Christensen having lived nearby, and the name. And if I could add one more thing, the model that's in the nave of the Lutheran Church is of the Madonna. That was, a model was made to honor Kelly Jess, son of Karen and Butch Jess, who died at, I think, age 14 of cancer. So there's a number of reasons, mostly historical, but of course the name itself comes from Mary, Mother of Jesus. And it's a vessel name. When I've Googled it, I can't find any examples except over in the Mediterranean. For some reason, it's not a common name.
It's not a common name for a boat.
No.
Oh, I love that.
Anyway.
Yeah.
We had contacted relatives of Ole Christensen, and a grandniece from British Columbia was going to come for the christening, and then with COVID, that prevented that from happening. So Karen Jess became the...
She was, and originally it was supposed to be Ole Christensen's great-granddaughter?
Grandniece, I think.
Grandniece, yeah, who had agreed to come and do the honors, but COVID, derailed that. Yeah, so it's worked out beautifully. I've been on it, Let me see now. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or mention? One thing, of course, you always want to ask a ferry captain. You've seen some things, I would imagine, with regard to, could be passenger shenanigans, it could be weather, it could be all of the above. Are there any stories you'd like to recount or share or talk about that are particularly memorable to you, that stand out in your mind?
Rather than one incident, I would say that you know, it's a general impression. I was on the C.G. Richter much of the time in winter. From, let's say, the late 1970s through, well, certainly through a good part of the 1990s, and I was often operating the vessel. Sometimes I was on with someone else as crew, but it was the difficulty of loading, of getting through ice in a vessel that doesn't have the the mass or the horsepower
Right.
to break ice as you would like,
Yeah.
or to extricate yourself if you get caught in ice.
Yeah.
So we certainly had a number of those instances.